Hello, I'm Tom, a hidden GPS tracker exposed an affair I never saw coming, but the twist that followed, well, it's something I'll never forget. Get ready for an emotional ride you won't see coming. Some guys are completely clueless, and I used to be one of them. Honestly, we should have a support group or something. A place where we can sit down, have a beer or two, and wallow in our own stupidity. But the problem is, we wouldn't even realize the meeting was for us. I got married to Sarah when we were in our early 20s. Now I'm 43, and she's 41. Over the years, we had 3 kids, and between raising them, we somehow managed to have fun. I'd read those books about being a good husband, stay faithful, take care of your family. So I followed the rules. I thought I was doing everything right. When our oldest, Emma, left for college, I wondered what Sarah would do now that the kids were starting to leave the house. She started volunteering at Northside Memorial Hospital 3 days a week. She worked in the gift shop some days and in the children's playroom on others. Occasionally, she mentioned other shifts, but I never really asked for details. We still had our social circle, friends we made while raising the kids. We'd get together once a month for barbecues or parties at each other's houses. I was particularly close with 3 guys, Mike, Dave, and Rick. We all loved fishing. 4 or 5 times a year, we'd head out for weekend fishing trips. It seemed like our marriage was like everyone else's. Kids out of the house, wives keeping busy, husbands working and counting down the days to retirement. On one fishing trip in May, that illusion started to fall apart. We were sitting quietly in the boat, casting our lines, enjoying the peace when Mike started talking about his son's recent college visit. Dave, though, was unusually quiet that day. I noticed and asked, "Dave, what's on your mind? You seem deep in thought." He hesitated for a moment before answering. "I don't know if I should say anything. If I'm wrong, it could hurt someone. But if I'm right, it'll hurt us all." A wave of unease hit me. "What did you see?" After a moment, he nodded slowly. "I saw Sarah parked behind the Crestwood Hotel." My stomach dropped. "When?" "3 weeks ago, and again just a few days ago." Rick cut in, "Wait, are you saying Sarah's cheating on Tom?" "I don't know what she's doing," Dave said, "but I saw her there twice in a month." Mike raised an eyebrow. "What were you doing at the Crestwood Hotel?" Dave sighed. "I deliver supplies there a few times a week. I saw her car." I felt the blood drain from my face. Why would Sarah be at the Crestwood twice in 1 month? Could she really be cheating on me? My mind raced, but I didn't want to believe it. I wanted to go home and confront her, but leaving would mean I believed it was true. So I stayed. When we got back to town, I borrowed Mike's car and drove home. The house was quiet when I arrived. Sarah wasn't there. I sat down at my computer, desperately trying to figure out what was going on. After a couple of hours of searching, I found some discreet surveillance gadgets that could help me track her movements. I ordered them, had them shipped to my office. That night, when Sarah came home, I tried to act normal. I decided to make a move on her to test her reaction, but she brushed me off, blaming hormones for her lack of interest. She said it was just her age. Life went on, normal on the surface, but underneath, suspicion gnawed at me. I paid attention to every detail, listened for clues, called her at random times, but everything seemed fine. The night after the first package arrived, I was in the garage, installing a GPS tracker under Sarah's car. From my laptop, I could track her location in real time. She'd never know. The next day, another package arrived, an audio recorder. I installed it in her car, too, so I could eavesdrop on her conversations. The following morning, Sarah wasn't scheduled to be at the hospital. Over breakfast, she mentioned she might go shopping. From my office, I tracked her as she visited Oak Ridge Mall and then stopped by City Market. By 1 p.m., she was back home. At 1:40, I watched her leave the house again. She drove south for about 10 minutes, then east for another 10, before circling back and eventually ending up at the Crestwood Hotel. My heart sank. I left the office and headed straight for the hotel, arriving about 5 minutes later. I parked my car out of sight, but close enough to see hers. At 4:20 p.m., Sarah walked out of the hotel and headed for her car. As she pulled out of the parking lot, I saw John, a friend of ours from the neighborhood, walk out of the same hotel. He nodded at her as she drove past. John, of all people. I couldn't believe it. He was married to Rachel, one of the kindest women in our circle of friends. He casually got into his car and drove off, completely unaware I had seen him. I sat there, stunned. My phone rang. It was Sarah. "Hey, Tom," she said. "What do you want for dinner?" "Dinner?" I echoed, still in shock. "How about something healthy? A salad or salmon?" "Sure, that sounds good. I'll be home just after 5. We hung up, and I stayed in the parking lot for a few more minutes, trying to process what I had just witnessed. Eventually, I went inside the hotel. I walked up to the front desk and spotted Angie, the daughter of one of my clients, working as a receptionist. We exchanged pleasantries before I asked, "Angie, a friend of mine mentioned another friend was staying here. Can you check for me?" "Of course, what's the name?" she asked. "John Carter," I replied. Her fingers flew across the keyboard, and after a few seconds, she looked up. "Room 312. He stays here every Thursday, checks in the morning, and leaves the next day." "Every Thursday?" "Yeah, sometimes more often, but always on Thursdays." "Can you check how long this has been going on?" I asked, my throat tight with anxiety. She nodded and typed again. "Looks like the first time was back in February. Would you get in trouble if you printed his stay history for me?" Angie glanced around and then back at me. "No one will know. Do you want a printout?" "Yes, please." She handed me the printout in a discreet folder. I didn't know what I'd do with it yet, but I knew I needed it. I thanked her, slipped the folder into my briefcase, and drove home. When I got home, Sarah had already prepared salmon and salad, just like she said. We ate dinner together, and she told me about her day of shopping. She mentioned going to the Oak Ridge Mall and City Market, conveniently leaving out any mention of the Crestwood Hotel. She sat there, lying to my face, calm and collected. After dinner, I excused myself and went to the bathroom. I checked the shower. It was still damp. There were clothes in the laundry basket. Everything seemed to line up with my suspicions. My anger surged. Why was she doing this? Why was Sarah having an affair with John? We hadn't been intimate in months, and now I knew why. Later that night, while she sat on the couch reading a book, I retreated to my computer and formulated a plan. I opened our family contact list and found Rachel Carter's email. She had 2 addresses, one for home and one for her job as a realtor. Using an anonymous email account, I sent her a message to her work email. Subject: David Carter's affair. Message: if you want to know who, when, and where David is cheating on you, reply to this email. I have evidence. I don't want anything from you. I sent the message at 8:15 p.m. and waited. By 9, I refreshed my inbox, and there it was, a reply. "I can meet tomorrow anytime. I'll be at 410 Oak Avenue in Fairfield all day showing houses. We can talk at lunch around 1. I deleted both emails from my account and hers. When I went to bed, Sarah was already asleep. I lay awake, replaying everything in my mind, the lies, the betrayal. The next morning, Sarah was her usual cheerful self, getting ready for her volunteer shift at the hospital. I kissed her goodbye, pretending that nothing was wrong. At noon, I called her and asked if I could take care of dinner that night. "Are you going to cook?" she asked, sounding surprised. "Yeah, I thought I'd make jambalaya. Does that sound good?" "That sounds perfect," she replied happily. I checked the GPS tracker on her car. She was still at the hospital, just as she said. I decided to drive past John's office on my way to meet Rachel. Just as I arrived, I saw John and 2 colleagues walking out of the building, heading toward a nearby deli. I quickly pulled over and installed a second GPS tracker on his car. At 1, I parked a couple of houses away from the open house on Oak Avenue and walked over to meet Rachel. When she saw me, her face went pale, and she closed the door, locking it behind me. She put up a lunch break sign and guided me to the sofa inside. She sat down, eyes full of unshed tears, waiting for me to speak. I pulled the folder from my briefcase and handed her the documents from the hotel. As she looked through the papers, she burst into tears. "I'm so sorry," I whispered. Through her tears, she looked up at me. "That bastard has been cheating on me for months with your wife." "I'm afraid so," I said quietly. She fell silent, wiping her eyes. After a few moments, she said, "These records don't prove everything. We need more concrete evidence, but once we have it, we need a plan. We can't just explode and act impulsively." "I agree," I said. "I've been trying to stay calm, but it's not easy. We need to be smart about this." We spent the next hour discussing what to do next. By the time we finished, it was nearly 4, and no one had come to the open house. But we had a plan. That night, I sat at my computer searching for any conferences or business trips that could serve as a cover. I found one for people in my field in Las Vegas and another for realtors. I sent the information to Rachel, and she quickly replied that we should go. I made a reservation and told Sarah about the conference. I explained that it could be a good networking opportunity and asked if she wanted to come with me. "I'll think about it," she said, "but a 3-day trip to Vegas sounds exhausting right now." The next day, Rachel waited until John got home and told him about the realtor conference. She invited him to join her, but he said he had too much work to do. Sarah called me at work and said she didn't feel up to a long drive and 3 days in Vegas either. Instead, she mentioned visiting her sister for a couple of days. I pretended to be disappointed, and we didn't bring up the trip again. Later that day, I contacted Henry Reynolds, my lawyer. He handled all the legal matters for my business, but I wanted to discuss personal matters this time. I asked if he had any professional or personal connections with Sarah. When he confirmed that he didn't, we talked about the potential consequences of divorce. I took notes about the division of assets and how to protect myself. Henry put together a plan to secure my finances and hired a private investigator to gather concrete evidence of the affair. At 4, I got a call from Rachel. She was calling from a payphone to let me know she had booked a room at the Mirage Hotel in Las Vegas. I was staying at Treasure Island. We talked about what we needed to bring and how to communicate without drawing suspicion. I told her to bring her laptop, a notebook, and a cheap cell phone that would work in Vegas. That night, I packed my suitcase. Sarah came into the room just as I was finishing and glanced at the suitcase. "You forgot your swimsuit," she said. "I'm not going on vacation," I replied. "Swimming can help you relax," she said, smiling. I added the swimsuit to my bag, and she didn't say anything more. When I finished packing, I put the suitcase in my car and went through our usual evening routine. Before going to bed, I invited Sarah to join me, but she said she was too tired. "Maybe when you get back," she teased with a small smile. Before dawn, I left the house and drove out of Hartford. My phone rang at 7:30 just as I passed through Pomona. It was Rachel. "Where are you?" she asked. "Almost in Pomona. There's a Denny's ahead where we used to stop for breakfast on our way to the fair," I said, recalling a past trip we had all taken with our families. "Perfect. I'll meet you there in 20 minutes, she said. I pulled into the parking lot and waited for her to arrive. When she walked in, she was wearing jeans, a casual button-up shirt, and boots. She looked different from the polished realtor I had known, but her smile was genuine. We sat down and ordered breakfast. As we ate, I found myself looking at Rachel in a new light. Despite the situation, it was refreshing to see her as a regular person, not just John's wife. We talked about our next steps, the anger we felt, and the sadness that had built up over the months. After we finished eating, Rachel mentioned how much she dreaded the long drive to Las Vegas by herself. I suggested she follow me, and then an idea hit me. We drove to a nearby parking lot where I asked the attendant how much it would cost to leave her car for 3 days. It was affordable, so we parked, transferred her luggage to my car, and set off together. Neither of us needed to make the journey alone. During the drive, we continued planning our strategy, talking for hours. Rachel took notes on what we'd do once we gathered enough evidence. We stopped in Baker for gas and a break, becoming more comfortable with each other as we bonded over our shared betrayal. In Las Vegas, I dropped Rachel off at the Mirage and checked into my own hotel at Treasure Island. We agreed to meet later for dinner. Back in my room, I called Henry, and he laughed. "You can come back now," he said. "Your wife went to John's house. We have everything on video. There's even a magazine on the table next to them with today's date on it." "Start the procedure," I said. "Did Rachel call you?" Henry asked. "Yes, she already called with the evidence. This will save both of you a lot of money." "Thanks," I said. "Can I ask you a hypothetical question?" "Of course. What would happen if Rachel and I started dating while we're in Vegas?" Henry chuckled. "Unless either of you are being followed, nothing. Just spread your time between both rooms. Do you want John or Sarah to be served with the papers before you return?" "No, I want to be home changing the locks before Sarah gets the papers. See if you can get a restraining order to keep her away from my business and the house." "When do you want this ready?" Henry asked. I'll discuss it with Rachel and let you know, I said before hanging up. An hour later, I walked into Caesar's Palace and found the restaurant where Rachel and I had agreed to meet for dinner. We sat down, ordered, and kept the conversation light at first. After dinner, I called Henry to update him on our plan. Wait to act until we return, I told him. Let your investigator gather more evidence while we're gone. It's better to have overwhelming proof than just enough. After I hung up, Rachel and I wandered around the shops inside Caesar's Palace. We didn't touch each other, but the tension between us was undeniable. The image of Sarah with John kept flashing in my mind, and I knew Rachel was thinking about the same thing with her husband. Eventually, Rachel said she was tired, so I hailed a taxi for her. Just before she got in, I could tell she wanted to kiss me. I wanted to kiss her too, but we held back. We weren't ready for that step yet. Back in my hotel room, I took a shower and was getting ready for bed when the phone rang. It was Sarah. Hey, where have you been? She asked. I had dinner at Caesar's Palace and walked around a bit afterward, I replied, keeping my tone casual. I saw some sexy clothes that would look good on you. Do you want me to pick something up? Sexy clothes? She laughed lightly. You know I hardly ever dress like that anymore. I'm almost 50, Tom. So that's a no, I asked. Yeah, no sexy clothes, but if you find a nice piece of jewelry, maybe pick that up instead. All right, I'll take a look tomorrow, I said. I'm going to turn off my phone and get some rest. Good night, Sarah. I love you. Good night, she replied, but she didn't say she loved me back. The omission stung, even though I had expected it. I sat down on the bed, ready to turn off my phone when it rang again. This time, it was Rachel. Open the door, she said. I opened the door, and she walked in, closing it behind her. I was still in a towel from my shower, and she was wearing the same jeans and boots from earlier. John doesn't care that I'm gone. He's with your wife right now in our bed, she said quietly. I thought about this the whole way back to my hotel. She smiled sadly and continued. At first, I wanted to be with you because they cheated on us, but now it's more than that. I don't want to spend the next year or two feeling sorry for myself, crying over him. I want to move forward. I want you, but not like this. Not for revenge. Just hold me, please. Don't rush into anything. I need to be loved, not just used. We spent the night together, but not in the way I had initially imagined. We lay in bed, comforting each other, not crossing that line. It was nearly noon when we finally got up, showered, and got dressed. I drove Rachel back to the Mirage where she needed to change clothes. While she was in her room, I called Henry. Alex and Mary spent the night together in Mary's bed. The investigator has everything on video, he said. I think we have enough evidence, I replied. That'll be more than enough. Rachel and I got in my car and drove out to Lake Mead for the afternoon. We talked the entire way there, unloading all the anger, sadness, and betrayal we had been holding inside. By the time we reached Kingman, Arizona, the anger had started to fade, leaving only a deep sadness. We realized that both of us had stopped loving our spouses long ago. We loved our kids, but not each other. After having dinner in Kingman, we drove back to Las Vegas. Our minds were clearer, but the pain still lingered. Back at my hotel, I packed up my things, checked out, and moved into Rachel's room at the Mirage. That night, we made love. It wasn't just about sex. It was about finding solace in each other after everything we had been through. She cried while we were together, and I almost did too, but I managed to hold back. When we returned home, we stopped at the lot where she had parked her car. As we transferred her luggage, she asked, "What now?" "I think I want to wake up with you every morning," I replied. "We can't go back to how things were. They've made their choices, and so have we." She nodded slowly. "Let's change seats. I don't want to sleep in the same bed as John anymore. I want to be with you." I smiled and said, "Then we can make this real. Let's live our lives. Stop being angry. Stop feeling betrayed. We get to choose how things end." We switched seats, and I followed her back to my office where we parked. Before I got out of my car, she asked, "Are we really doing this? You want to live together and for both of us to get divorced?" "Yes," I said firmly. "I want us to move forward. The day the divorce is final, I want to marry you. Will you marry me?" "It's too soon. We barely know each other. Not like this," she said, hesitant. "Rachel, we've known each other for years. We've just realized we could be something more. I love you. I can commit to loving you right now." I told her. She paused for a moment before whispering, I love you too, Tom. I'll think about everything as I drive. As I pulled into the office parking lot, Rachel was already there, waiting for me. She opened my car door and squeezed in next to me, beaming. Yes, I love you. Yes, I want to wake up with you every morning. And yes, I'll marry you, she said. What do we do next? Rachel asked, still sitting close to me in the car. We need to talk to our spouses, I said, checking the GPS trackers on both John's and Sarah's cars. They were both at Rachel's house. Let's go, I said. We drove together to her house, following Sarah's car. We parked a block away, quietly entered the house through the back door, and made our way inside. We found them in the living room, Sarah and John, sitting close on the couch. I motioned to Rachel to sit on the sofa across from them. We both sat down without saying a word. When Sarah finally noticed us, she froze, her eyes wide. Oh my God, she whispered. John, startled, stood up. Tom, Rachel, this is not what it looks like, John began. Sit down, I interrupted, my voice steady. We'll talk in a moment. Sarah's face paled as she scrambled to her feet. Tom, please let me explain. You'll get a chance to explain later. For now, go upstairs and get dressed, I said firmly. They hurried out of the room and ran upstairs. Rachel and I gathered their clothes and took them to the bathroom, placing everything inside. Once I heard the water running, I quietly opened the door, dropped the clothes inside, and walked back to the living room. I found Rachel meticulously cleaning a stain on the carpet. Choose, I said softly. Choose what? She asked, looking confused. Where do you want to live? My house or yours? She looked at me, her eyes full of confusion. Why do I get to choose? Because they're the ones who destroyed everything. We get to decide what happens next. Before she could respond, John and Sarah returned, fully dressed. I pointed to the sofa opposite us, and they sat down, their bodies tense. Rachel stopped cleaning and took a seat next to me. John opened his mouth to speak, but Rachel raised her hand, stopping him. I turned to him and asked, John, do you love my wife, or is this just about sex? John stared at the floor for a long moment before finally answering. I think I love her. I looked at Sarah. Sarah, do you love John? Her answer was immediate. Yes. If you weren't married to us, would you live together? I asked, looking between the two of them. John hesitated. I don't want a divorce, he said quietly. So, what do you want? I asked, the calm in my voice masking the anger boiling underneath. My permission to keep sleeping with my wife? John looked up, his eyes filled with regret. I wanted you to never know. I didn't want anyone to get hurt. Sarah was crying now, her hands trembling. Tom, I never meant for this to happen. I'm sorry. You hurt me. You planned this. You visited the Crestwood at least 20 times to meet with someone else's spouse. You destroyed our marriage, I said, my voice remaining calm, even though my heart was breaking inside. I turned to John. You have 5 minutes to pack your things and leave. You can work out the rest with my lawyer. I glanced at Rachel, who checked her watch. John didn't move. 4 minutes, she said. Finally, John got up, defeated, and walked to the bedroom. I stood up and followed him, watching as he packed his suitcase. You don't want to be here when the timer runs out, I warned him, my voice low. John zipped up his suitcase and walked out of the house without saying a word to Rachel or Sarah. I looked at Sarah, her face streaked with tears. Sarah, go pack your things and leave my house, I said. As she stood up to leave, I added, You can work with my lawyer to negotiate what you're entitled to, but don't set foot in my house again without his consent. If either of you comes near my property without permission, I'll make sure everyone knows what you've done, including our kids. With that, Rachel and I watched them go. She locked the door behind them, and we were left in the quiet aftermath. After Sarah and John left, I followed Sarah to her car and waited as she loaded her things. As she pulled out of the driveway, I noticed John pulling up behind her in his car. They didn't drive away right away, so I turned on the audio monitor I had installed in Sarah's car. They're really not going to let this slide, John said. No, they're divorcing us. Tom is done with me. He called me heartless, and maybe he's right, Sarah replied, her voice heavy with emotion. You're not heartless, Sarah, John said softly, but what are we going to do? You see, Sarah snapped. You don't even ask what we're going to do. You talk like we're on different sides. We got caught cheating, and now you're acting like you don't want to deal with the consequences. You did this to me, and now I've lost everything. Sarah's voice broke, and I could hear her sobbing. I've lost my family, my home, everything, and you're just walking away. There was a pause, and I heard the car door open and close. John must have gotten into her car. The sound of their conversation faded as they drove off, and I turned off the audio. My heart was heavy with everything that had happened. Though I was hurt and angry, part of me still hated that Sarah was suffering. After a few moments of standing there in the quiet, I headed to the garage. There was an old set of locks that I had purchased years ago, but never got around to installing. Now seemed like the perfect time to put them to use. I spent the next hour replacing the locks on every door, ensuring that Sarah's keys would no longer work. When I finished, I called Rachel. "How are you?" I asked. "It was harder than I expected," she admitted, her voice soft. "John left, but not before making things ugly. I'm coming over to your place now." "Good. I'll see you soon," I said, hanging up the phone. I felt a strange sense of relief, knowing she was on her way. 15 minutes later, Rachel pulled into my driveway. We sat in the kitchen together, talking over everything that had happened. She told me about her final confrontation with John, and I shared the details of Sarah's tearful departure. We talked about our plans moving forward, about how we would begin the divorce proceedings, sell Rachel's house, and figure out how to blend our two families together. There was still a long road ahead, but at least we knew what we wanted now. As we sat there in the kitchen, Rachel looked at me with a sad smile. "We're really going to do this, aren't we? We're going to start over." I nodded. "Yes, we are. We've already made the decision. Now we just have to follow through." She paused, then said, "It's funny. A few days ago, I was still holding out hope that maybe somehow I could fix things with John, but I see now that it was never going to work. He didn't want to fix it, and neither did Sarah." "I feel the same way," I said. "I've been holding on to something that wasn't real anymore. We both have, but now we can move on." We hugged for a long time, finding comfort in the shared understanding that the life we had known was over, but in its place, we were building something new. The next morning, Rachel and I began packing up some of her things. We decided she would move into my house temporarily until we figured out our long-term plans. While we were boxing up items, her phone rang. It was Carol, her daughter. "Mom, where are you?" "I called Dad this morning, and he said I should ask you." "What's going on?" Carol asked. Rachel's face tightened as she replied, "Honey, can you come home? We need to talk. Bring your brother with you. It's important." Carol was full of questions, but Rachel stayed firm, insisting they would talk when they got home. After hanging up, she looked at me, a little shaken. "It's time to tell the kids everything, isn't it?" I nodded. "Yeah, it's time." I called my own kids, Emma, Kyle, and Matt, and asked them to come home as soon as possible. They knew something was wrong. The tension in my voice was unmistakable. But like Rachel, I told them we'd talk when they arrived. We both called Henry, our lawyer, to let him know we were having a family meeting. He promised to bring the photographs and be available if we needed him. Once the calls were made, we continued packing, stacking boxes in the garage, and waiting for our children to arrive. By the afternoon, Carol, her brother, and my kids had all arrived at my house. We sat everyone down in the living room, Rachel and I on one side, the kids on the other. I could see the confusion and concern on their faces. I took a deep breath and started from the beginning. "I'm sure you've noticed that things haven't been right between me and your mom," I said, addressing my kids first. "A few weeks ago, I found out that your mom has been having an affair. I have evidence, and it's undeniable." I paused, letting the weight of my words sink in before continuing. "I installed a GPS tracker on her car after some suspicions were raised. She's been meeting with John Carter, and it's been going on for months." The room fell into dead silence as my kids processed the information. Kyle shook his head in disbelief. "You're saying Mom's been cheating? Are you sure?" "I'm sure," I said. "I saw them together, and I have hotel records." I looked over at Rachel, and she began telling her own kids. "Your dad, John, has been seeing Tom's wife, Sarah. It's true, and I have all the proof you need if you want to see it. But we're moving forward from here. We've decided to get divorced. We're done living in the shadow of betrayal." Carol looked shaken, her eyes wide. She had always looked up to her father, and this news hit her hard. "What happens now?" she asked, her voice trembling. "We're selling the house," Rachel said. And Nick and we've been talking about a future together. Matt, my youngest, blurted out, "Wait, so you two are together now?" Rachel and I exchanged a look. "We've only just started," I said, "but yes, we're moving in that direction." There was silence again, but this time it was thoughtful. Finally, Carol stood up and walked over to me. She took the envelope of evidence from the table where I had placed it and opened it carefully. Her hands shook as she pulled out a single photograph of her father with my wife. Tears welled up in her eyes, but she didn't sob. "Dad's such a bastard," she whispered, closing the envelope and handing it back to me. "I can't believe he did this." I put a hand on her shoulder, feeling her pain and betrayal. Kyle and Matt sat in silence, their faces a mixture of confusion and anger. Emma, my eldest, looked at me, her eyes filled with tears. "What now, Dad?" she asked. I took a deep breath and looked at Emma. "Now we move on," I said, my voice steady. "We pick up the pieces and create something new. Rachel and I will figure it out, but for now, we're here for you, whatever you need." The silence in the room was heavy after my words. I could see the hurt and confusion on all the kids' faces. Emma wiped away a tear, and Kyle sat staring at the floor, still trying to process everything. Finally, Matt spoke up. "Are you really going to sell the house, Mom?" he asked Rachel, his voice quiet. Rachel nodded, giving him a soft, sad smile. "Yes, honey. I don't need a big house anymore. This place holds too many memories, and honestly, I think it's time to start fresh." Carol stood up, still shaken, but now with a determined look on her face. "We'll get through this," she said, her voice firm. "We've been through tough things before, and we'll get through this too." She glanced over at me, then back at her mom. "I'm not going to lie. It's going to take time for me to process all of this. But if you're happy with Tom and you two are serious, then I want to support you." Rachel's eyes filled with tears as she hugged her daughter. "Thank you, sweetie. It means a lot to me that you're willing to be open to this." My son Kyle finally spoke, his voice thick with emotion. "I don't even know what to say. I'm angry at Mom. I'm angry at John. But if you're telling me this is what's going to happen, I'll deal with it." He looked at me, his expression a mixture of frustration and sadness. "I just need some time." "I understand, Kyle," I said, nodding. "Take the time you need. None of this is easy. It's been hard on all of us." After a moment of silence, Rachel suggested, "Why don't we all have some dinner? It's been a long day, and I think we could all use a break." We ordered takeout from Dragon Palace, a nearby Chinese restaurant the kids had always liked. The mood during dinner was somber, but somewhat lighter. The kids asked more questions about how the divorce would work, how we would manage everything, and what life would look like in the future. We answered as best we could, explaining that we were taking things one step at a time. As the night wore on, the kids seemed to start accepting the reality of the situation. We didn't sugarcoat anything, but we also reassured them that everything was going to be okay, even if it would be different. By the end of the evening, Carol looked at me again and said, "I still don't want to believe that Dad could do something like this, but I can't deny the proof. I just hope you'll both be happier now." I smiled softly at her. "We will be, and we'll all get through this together." The evening ended on a surprisingly hopeful note. The kids were beginning to come to terms with the truth. They weren't happy about what had happened, but they were willing to give us a chance to move forward. Later that night, after the kids had left and Rachel and I were alone, she leaned back against the kitchen counter and sighed. "That went better than I thought it would." "Yeah," I agreed. "It's a lot for them to take in, but I think they'll be okay." Rachel nodded, a small smile on her face. "I was worried about how they'd react, but I feel a bit more hopeful now. Maybe we really can move forward and start fresh." I stepped closer to her, placing my hands on her shoulders. "We can and we will. This is our chance to build something new, something better." The next few days were a whirlwind of emotions and decisions. Rachel and I spent hours discussing how we were going to move forward. We began sorting through the paperwork for our divorces, talking with Henry about the steps we needed to take. It wasn't easy, but having a clear path ahead felt strangely comforting. A few days later, Rachel's kids came by to help pack up more things from her house. It was bittersweet. Her children had grown up there, and each item packed away seemed to carry a memory. I could tell it was hard for her, but she stayed focused, determined to move on. By the end of the day, we had made significant progress. The house was starting to feel more like a place ready for sale and less like the home it had been. That weekend, we planned a family camping trip. It was something we had done together with both of our families before the betrayal, and the kids thought it would be a good way to start fresh as one family. I could see the nervousness in their faces as we packed up the cars and headed to the campground, but there was also a sense of anticipation. When we arrived at the campsite, we set up the tents and built a fire. The kids relaxed quickly, laughing and telling stories as if the tension from the past few weeks had lifted. For the first time in a long while, there was a sense of peace. As night fell and we sat around the campfire, Carol spoke up. This feels good," she said, her voice soft. "I didn't think I'd ever be able to feel normal again after what happened, but being here, with all of us together, it helps." The other kids nodded in agreement. Emma smiled at me and said, "It's strange, but I'm glad we're all here together. It feels like maybe things will be okay after all." I looked at Rachel, her face illuminated by the flickering firelight, and felt a warmth in my heart that I hadn't experienced in a long time. We had both gone through so much pain, betrayal, and heartache, but here we were, surrounded by our kids, finding a way to move forward together. The next morning, we went on a hike through the woods. The kids led the way, laughing and joking with each other, as if the past few months of turmoil had been lifted from their shoulders. Rachel and I walked behind them, taking in the fresh air and the sight of our children bonding. "You know," she said, glancing over at me, "I think this trip was exactly what we needed." "I think so too," I replied, smiling. We returned to the campsite later in the afternoon, exhausted but happy. That night, as we sat around the campfire again, I realized just how much we had all grown. Our family wasn't perfect, and the scars of betrayal would always be there, but we were healing, together. Several months passed. The divorces were finalized, and Rachel sold her house. We officially moved in together and began building a new life. The kids accepted our relationship, even though it wasn't always easy for them. They understood that we had chosen to start over, and they respected that. The holidays came and went, and our new blended family grew closer. The pain of the past still lingered, but with each passing day, it became a little easier to manage. We made new traditions, new memories, and slowly, the old wounds began to heal. One day, out of the blue, Rachel and I received news that John had been sentenced to several years in prison. His attack on me, combined with other charges, had finally caught up with him. None of the kids wanted to visit him, and they didn't seem surprised by the news. It was just another chapter closed in the story of our lives. As for Sarah, no one had heard from her since she withdrew money from the credit card and disappeared. It was as if she had vanished, leaving behind only the pain she had caused. Her absence weighed on the kids for a while, but eventually they accepted it. She had made her choice, and they had made theirs. 4 years passed. Every year, our new family continued the tradition of going camping together. It became a way for us to reconnect and reflect on how far we had come. We didn't forget the past, but we didn't let it define us either. Some people are helpless, I realized. They let their mistakes control them. Their betrayals ruin everything they've built. But not us. We found a way to move forward, to rebuild, and to create something better out of the ashes. As I sat around the campfire with Rachel and the kids, I knew we had come a long way, and I knew that no matter what came next, we would be okay. If you enjoyed this story, please subscribe and comment your personal stories if you relate.